One. So last night when we were here, I was kind of watching. Nobody had index cards. And my index cards weren't done yet because it was going to be really hard to do that. I was working the event and I didn't have time. So my friend Fiona, she's my friend because we sat together, and she had bought her index cards at the same place I did. So I'm super excited that I get to speak here. This picture is a picture of my mom, and I'm going to tell you a little story. I'm going to try to leave out most of the sad parts. It's rough following the singers and already being a little bit emotional. So sometimes, you ever feel like the weight of the whole world is on your own shoulders? I kind of feel like that a lot. Put all that weight on a book on each side, and that's me. So it started at a young age. My mom was a teen mom. She found out she was going to be a mom when she was 15. And by the time she was 20, she had 3 little girls. And by the time she turned 21, she was divorced from my dad and a single mom. No driver's license, no way to get to work, and no way to get her babies to the babysitter. So my other friend, Michael McLean, you remember him from last night. He's my friend because I gave him a ride to his hotel. So he kind of gave us permission to use these things like however we wanted, you know? So we're gonna pretend like this is a bicycle, okay? And here's the seat, here's the handlebars, here's a baby carrier. And my mom was a dedicated mom as a single mom. I have to give that little disclaimer in there. As a single mom, my mom was a dedicated mom. And back in the day, we had skating rinks. Does everybody remember skating rinks? So my mom skated in a skate-a-thon, and the top prize was a 10-speed bicycle. So she went and got all these pledges, and she skated for 24 hours straight so that she could win that bicycle. And then her friends from work bought her a baby carrier to put on the back of the bicycle. So there's 3 babies. And here's my mom on the seat. Here's my middle sister, the middle one there. She's the lucky one. She got to sit in this little carrier. And my mom had my baby sister, also the lucky one, right here in this little pack, which they weren't as sturdy back then. This is really unsafe. I'm pretty sure none of us had helmets on either. So then there's me. I'm the oldest child, and I'm 6 by now, I think. And so lots of times I would walk next to the bike, and my mom would take us to the babysitter. But sometimes I would get tired. And so we're back in this spot, and there's this little boys' bar right here. And so I would sit sideways on it and hold onto the handlebars, and I'm not joking. This is my earliest memory. And my mom would drive us to the babysitter on this bicycle. And then she would ride her bicycle 15 miles to work. I think it's 15 miles. If you're familiar with Payson, or Utah, she drove from Payson to Spanish Fork, Utah on her bicycle, both ways, every day. So that's just a tiny bit about my mom as a single mom. My mom wasn't really taught how to make wise choices in a spouse, and chose a spouse that was not, he just shouldn't have been, that's not her spouse, that's my dad, by the way, holding my baby brother, or my little baby, his very first grandson. So several marriages later, my mom still is not picking wise spouses. I didn't have a very good relationship with my mom. By the time I was in 6th grade, I lived with my dad and my bonus mom here in Arizona. So that's just a tiny bit of that backstory. We're gonna fast forward to 2009. And my mom calls me. She lives in Minnesota at this time, is a single mom again. I have an 11-year-old. At that time, my brother was 11. and he was her caretaker because she was battling bilateral breast cancer. She called me on the phone and she said, I need to have a double mastectomy, and I am wondering if you can come and take care of me during that surgery. So lots of things went through my mind, and how can I do this? I have 7 kids still at home, have to fly all the way to Minnesota. I just don't know how I'm gonna do this. I don't have very much patience for my mom. It's sad that I have to admit that. So what got me through it was prayer, and I prayed a lot. I prayed for the right answers, for the patience that I knew I would needed, because this was gonna be a total care situation. My mom wasn't gonna be able to care for herself for several weeks. And I knew I needed to do this for her. That's what we do as sisters. We serve others. But we don't ever want that service to be a burden on us either. So my answers to my prayers, and I did pray lots and lots about this, my answers came in the form of, not only do you need to do this for your mom, but you need to do this for me. My answer was that this was God's plan, not just God's plan for me, but for my mom also. So I went to Minnesota and I cared for my mom, and I didn't ever feel like I was needing to have that extra level of patience. All those prayers that I said and continued to say got me through that, and it wasn't sad. I expected to be sad, and I expected to feel an overwhelming sadness to have to see my mom in this kind of a situation. So fast forward to now, I speak to my mom almost every day on the phone, and that's something that I didn't have my whole life. I lived with my dad, and I rarely heard from my mom beside maybe when I went to visit my sisters at Christmas time, or they came to visit me. I want to give you a tiny bit of history about living with my dad. My dad was and is a very inactive member of the LDS Church, and moving from Utah to Arizona, my dad knew that I wanted to go to church. I was not a member of the church when I lived in Utah. My mom is not a member and did not allow me to go to church, even though my grandparents requested it. So when I moved with my dad, he knew that that was an important thing to me, to go to church. And I remember thinking back when I was a young girl walking into an LDS church with my grandparents and feeling this overwhelming feeling of comfort and kindness and love. And I just always thought it was because my grandparents were there, and I loved my grandparents, and so because I was with my grandparents, this must be what it feels like to just be with your grandparents. And later on, when I lived in Arizona with my dad, I went to church, and I went to early morning seminary, and I went to youth group with my friends, and no one ever asked me if I wanted to be baptized. I think, after speaking with my bishop, that my dad's records had always been in my ward, and so they knew that, and they knew I was moving from Utah, and so they just maybe were always waiting for my records to show up. And so when I was 17, I no longer waited for that person to ask me if I wanted to be baptized. I was big enough to ask to be baptized all by myself, and so I did. And I was baptized at a family reunion in Utah by my grandpa. Such an overwhelming thing. I didn't ever feel like I was a convert. I just always thought I was a member. And it's because my dad, who was inactive, knew that that was also God's plan for me, that this is where I needed to be. And he knew in his heart of hearts that this is an important place for me to be, and that I needed to know how to follow God's plan. I have a testimony of the church as everyone or some people, sometimes that testimony wavers, but every time my testimony wavers, it gets so much stronger the next time. I leave this with you in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.